Welcome to CosmoFactory, a podcast by Cosmoprof Worldwide Bologna, where we explore the entire cosmetics, personal care, and fragrance industry supply chain. I'm your host, Deanna Utrusky, and here at CosmoFactory, we look beyond the trends to discover the ideas, initiatives, and innovations that are truly advancing beauty. Let's get started. This episode is about the dynamics of consumer preferences. It's about public understanding of sustainable beauty, about brand building and responsibility, and it's about plants, people, fragrance, and more. For today's episode of the CosmoFactory podcast, I am speaking with Susan Griffin-Black, founder and co-CEO at EO Products. Susan, welcome to CosmoFactory.
Thank you. And thanks so much for having me. I'm so happy to be here.
You're welcome. I'm happy that you are here. To get started, I want to let our listeners who may not be familiar with EO Products know that the brand has been in business for over 30 years. It's an independent personal care brand based in California. EO Products retails, and tell me if I have this wrong, the brand retails in over 10 countries. You have shared the CEO role since day one. I'm hoping that you'll start us off by adding even more context. If you would, please say something about what the business looks like today, as well as how it compares with the beginnings of EO Products.
Sure. Well, today we are located in Marin County still. That's our, where we started making products. And actually, maybe in San Francisco for a bit. And we are 118 strong, and we make all of our products ourselves. And we started doing that really from the beginning because we couldn't find contract manufacturers that would make few enough, because we were always strapped for cash, and then also make to our specifications. Because we wanted to make, if we made a foaming product, we wanted to make it without sodium lauryl sulfate, which was the prevalent, soap product at that time. So a lot has happened over these 30 years in the market, and with us. My background was I was a clothing designer. I worked the last company I worked for was at Esprit for the late Doug Tompkins. And I was really, that was a portal for me of understanding how we made things, because he was very interested, along with his longtime friend, Yvon Chouinard, and other environmentalists who were sort of up and coming at the time, with the harm that we were causing in the making of things. And could we do it differently? And so that was the very beginning of organic cotton and so forth. And then when I really started to look at the interdependence between how we grow things, how we make things, it was a very natural progression. He sold the company. I left about 6 months after he sold. And I was wandering around London a little bit before that on a buying trip for Esprit. And I came across this little apothecary called Neil's Yard Remedies. And upstairs they had a homeopathist, aromatherapist, all sorts of sort of practitioners, and they made the medicines and filled the prescriptions in this little shop. And I walked in, and the smell is unforgettable. And I was like, oh my God, this smells amazing. Where am I? And I picked up a little bottle of lavender essential oil, lavender angustifolia. And I was just so totally entranced. And I was like, yeah, this is what I want to do. So I just started, figuring everything out about it and studying aromatherapy, and took a crash course in cosmetic chemistry. And EO really came out of a private label project that was launched in 1995 in the Bloomingdale's holiday catalog. I had a lot of those connections from, being in the fashion world for
Sure.
15 years. And so it was like I did these blends, these 4 blends, Bloomingdale's, in conjunction with the buyer at Bloomingdale's. And then it was like, okay, well, what's next? And, the logo was very simple. I sat next to my friend who worked for Apple. And as we started developing mostly products that we could make ourselves, and we're started to get very familiar with essential oil distributors mostly. We've had a few stints in trying to distill our own. We used to grow rose geranium at Green Gulch and, see if we could do a special product around that. But we're plenty vertical, and being that much more vertical that way, we certainly didn't have the expertise and the resources to do that as well. Although we love that part of the business
Yeah,
very much,
yeah.
and my partner Brad travels quite a bit to all of the farms and growers and distillers, that we've used and had relationships with over the years.
Mhm, mhm. And as I mentioned, you're several decades into this brand, and you suggested, or stated rather, that you're still manufacturing products on your own. Is that correct?
Yes.
Yeah. So I'm curious, sort of at this stage in your business, um, to really hear about the machinery that you've purchased, that you're working with, because that's an important piece of the supply chain that is quite fascinating once you get into it, but not everyone is thinking about it, especially if they're starting at a very small scale. Can you give us a sense of the sort of equipment you have in your facility and how and where you acquired that?
Yes, this is not my area of expertise, but I'll walk you through it sort of from my point of view,
Of
which
course.
I think might be interesting, right? So I started, we made products by hand in beakers, right?
Yes.
And hand pouring. I got a private label order from Birkenstock for a little gift with purchase foot care kit that had a foot oil in it and foot salts, a little foot soak, in a craft box that we hand stamped. And we had to make 10,000 in a relatively short amount of time. And Brad, who I knew at the time, he was in the clothing business, came down and he said, "You're never going to be able to hand pour this." And then he jury rigged this little gravity feed system. He had me at gravity feed, really. And so that gravity feed turned into a simplex filler machine. Everything else was manual. That turned into, automated filling. That turned into 4-bottle automated filling. It's been a progression based on where the strength of the products and our business sort of led us. So
Mhm.
it's been pretty organic, with the exception of in 1999, we bought a small private label manufacturer that had been in business for a long time that
Mhm.
happened to be in Marin. And from there, we had a much different level of capacity because they had some customers. So that came with a chemist, 2 lines, a full-on 1,000-gallon tank. And then we had to learn, and they stayed long enough to, for the transition
Mhm.
to sort of teach us what it was like to scale at that point. Although then that created, of course, other problems because our revenue didn't match our capacity, right? So, and
Yes.
as we all know, that's fits and starts over time, and also we have had to be very sort of scrappy and expert at using the space that we have because we've avoided moving. Now, we moved once and we've been in this space for, 8 years,
Mhm.
and we would like to kind of keep going here. So we've got 3 buildings and we bought a building. And so we've got a little campus situation. And we're just investing in some auto-filling equipment for hand sanitizers, which is a custom uh, arrangement, and we're working with a local company, local US company, to make that happen, and also Canada. And hopefully tariffs will we don't know at this point.
Sure.
And so we make our way based upon what's actually happening without trying to get too far ahead of ourselves, of course.
Yeah, no, that makes very good sense. And thank you for sharing that. You know, Susan, you and I had a very nice conversation quite early in the new year. And something that really stayed with me was a comment you made about consumer decision making, or maybe it was about consumer acquisition. We were talking about the demand for sustainable beauty, and you seem to be saying that it's not so much about convincing consumers to buy sustainable products, but rather sharing information and providing options. You told me that you are, in a way, asking the consumer, do you want this or that? And I'm curious to hear what the phrase this or that represents. I'm hoping you can say more about the choice that a brand like yours is offering consumers.
Yes. I think the essence of what started the conversation, and then where it sort of meandered to, was, um, essential oils are really the heart and soul of what makes our products different. And I think I used the example of a real rose and a fake rose. If you put them 10 feet away, they do a great job with artificial flowers now. You might not be able to tell the difference, and you might think that's more beautiful than the real rose, that you just picked from your garden. And as you move closer, whether it's plastic or silk or whatever you know, it has no life force, right? And the real rose, at whatever stage it's in from a beauty and aesthetic point of view, even if it's the petals are falling off and, it's as beautifully flawed as life is, that our appreciation for that exchange and that reciprocity in our relationship with nature is reflected in the why and how we use essential oils for all of our formulations. So then it's a matter of education to say, do you want this or that? If you want this, choose this. But we want you to have the information to make the choice. And people don't read, and people don't want to take the time necessarily. When Whole Foods started and the natural products market was emerging, that was because they had trust in all of those retailers who were helping curate and edit and make those decisions for them. And now, it's a free for all in terms of where you get information that is helpful for you to make a decision. So our job in some ways is much more difficult and also much easier because of the development and the scale of, where the natural products exist.
No, that makes good sense. We've talked a bit about supply chain details, right? You've created your own manufacturing system, or facility and capabilities, which is fantastic. But we hear a lot on CosmoFactory about the importance of relationships, and particularly supply chain partnerships. I'm curious to hear your experience as a smaller brand, and one that it seems to me you really had no intention of scaling rapidly or positioning for acquisition. I'm wondering how you identify suppliers, how you develop constructive partnerships with a brand that, in all fairness, has always been dealing in relatively small volumes.
Yes. I think that's true until we started Everyone, in 2012.
Right, which is a
And
second brand that your
right,
business owns.
yes. And we really used the same charter, except the difference was we were able to now make more accessible products by using less expensive or the least expensive essential oils. So we didn't have to deviate from that. And then less sophisticated formulas in terms of, additives and botanical actives and so forth. So that opened up the volume for bettering our and reciprocity with our supply chain. So, for example, our 100% post-consumer resin bottles, we have worked with a local Southern California manufacturer for many, many years. And that relationship may have started with EO back in the day, but it's developed in a way where we can come together to say, well, this is most important. We got to do 100%, not 80%. Or, working with pump manufacturers and, closure manufacturers on how much of this can be recyclable. How can we refill that makes, and in a way that makes it easier for consumers without creating the demand on us to come up with a refill system. And we worked with Wonderfill, and we had a little retail store where we've done all sorts of experimentation. But the thing is that our relationships with our suppliers and all of our stakeholders really are a priority in terms of really listening to each other and reciprocity and figuring out the best way to work together. I mean, we had some, a real downturn after COVID and being in the hand sanitizer business as we all did. And it was because of our relationship with our suppliers that we were able to get through that, inventory situation. It was most difficult, but because we've been around for a long time and we're as dedicated as ever to turn it around, that was essentially suppliers, and a couple, really became our bank for as long as they could. And we understood that and worked together very closely about that. And
Yes.
also that it just that longevity in that relationship was key in really in life, in everything.
Mhm.
And when that's a primary value, kindness, respect, relationship, good communication, listening, and you bring things down to the most human level of how do we navigate this, not posturing, but what is really possible and what can we both do for the best outcome for all of us, then that's sort of like a value and a skill, I think, that develops over years and you get better at it and it becomes ever more important.
Sure, sure. No, that's wonderful to hear. And you mentioned packaging briefly there. I know I use the expression sort of sustainable sourcing frequently. I believe I've heard you talk about responsible sourcing, which is a very nice way to phrase it. I'm hoping you can share a little bit more about how you handle sustainability. And I think you have made a company decision about plastic neutrality that might be a good example to share with us.
Yes. In 1990, friends of mine wrote this book called Paper or Plastic, these friends from Esprit.
Yeah.
And the debate, even though it's much more quantifiable and we've progressed in a lot of ways, in a lot of ways we haven't, because there's so many factors that go into packaging and it's such an integral part of what we do. We've always opted for using more stock packaging, although it gets specialized perhaps by size because our formulas are expensive. And our design idea and ideal is really quite simple. And so, we were sort of the first to be in the marketplace in natural without a leaf or a flower or, it's so, we took a very different sort of point of view from a design position, early on. And then as we progressed, it was very important to do as little harm as possible and keep that in mind with how we made things. And, this came directly from my experience working at Esprit for that year of, well, how do you really handle waste? Because there's so much of it. And, how do we become zero waste? We're a B Corp, and I think that's great. In that there's a community around each other that's conversing around how to do it better, how to do it in a responsible way, in a environmentally and energetically and so forth. Um, so plastic neutrality is something that we've always aspired to, And, I can't give you a date because it's an ever-changing world. It's like, yes, we're gonna do this by this, but then we always have to, it's a very imperfect process that always requires paying attention to the next thing, or is that right? Are they saying that right? And is that really true? So much greenwashing over these years because there's so much economic opportunity, even if it's for a short time, and you can extract, then okay, then it didn't work, and hundreds of millions of dollars were wasted. Somebody made money somewhere, hopefully, and and life goes on. So we've been very mindful about, is it sustainable? Really? Not really, because what we're doing is, it's sustainable socially, from a social impact point of view. It's sustainable economically. We feel like, we make a beautiful and better for you product, and all of that has purpose and heart and meaning. On the environmental side, it's a constant work to balance out what it is that we're doing with the harm that we're causing, and the equation of, making sure that we're doing our best.
No,
And it's a tall order, it is.
absolutely, absolutely. And I certainly appreciate your candor there. I have to say, Susan, your work is clearly filled with purpose and with passion, both attributes that I know so many people in our industry resonate with. It was really great hearing from you today, and I thank you for being my guest on Cosmo Factory.
Thank you so much for having me. It was a real pleasure, and hope to see you soon.
Thank you so much for listening. If you find the Cosmo Factory podcast useful, please take a moment to leave us a 5-star review and share your thoughts so even more cosmetic industry professionals can discover the Cosmo Factory. I'm Deanna Utrusky. Please join me again next Tuesday for a new episode of the Cosmo Factory podcast.